Chapter 1 The Whispering Woods. Under a moonless sky, the dense canopy of the Whispering Woods seemed to absorb every speck of light, creating an abyss of darkness. Emma, Jack, Lily, and Alex stood at the forest's edge, their hearts pounding in a mix of fear and excitement. "Are we really doing this?" Alex's voice trembled slightly, betraying his nerves. Emma smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "It's just an urban legend. Besides, we need a good story for our graduation year, right?" The Whispering Woods had always been a source of eerie tales and local legends. Stories of spirits, unexplained disappearances, and strange lights were commonplace, making it the perfect setting for their adventure. They ventured deeper into the forest, guided only by the weak beams of their flashlights and the thrill of defying the unknown. The forest seemed to close in around them, the rustling leaves and cracking branches underfoot adding to the ominous atmosphere. As they reached a small clearing, known among locals as Echo's Heart, the air grew still, the usual sounds of the forest ceasing abruptly. The silence was oppressive, like a heavy blanket smothering all sound. "This is it," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. She was the enthusiast of the supernatural in their group, always armed with a story or legend. They gathered in a circle, the fire they had started casting eerie shadows on the trees around them. The game, as per the legend, was simple. One must call into the darkness and wait for an echo. An echo meant the spirits were listening. One by one, they called out, their voices swallowed by the dense forest. No echo came, only the sound of their own breaths and the faint crackling of the fire. Disappointment flickered in their eyes, the initial thrill giving way to a sense of foolishness. "Told you it was just a dumb legend," Jack scoffed, throwing another log into the fire. As they prepared for bed, the atmosphere lightened, the tension broken by their laughter and chatter. They crawled into their tents, unaware that the real game had just begun. At the stroke of midnight, a cold wind swept through the clearing, and a faint, almost inaudible echo resonated through the trees. It was a sound not of this world, a ghostly whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. As they slept, the forest around them changed. The trees leaned in closer, their branches like gnarled hands reaching for the unsuspecting friends. A thin mist crept along the ground, encircling their tents in a ghostly embrace. In the heart of the forest, something ancient had awakened, its hunger stirred by the echoes of the living. The game had been played, the invitation sent. Unseen eyes watched the slumbering friends, a silent promise hanging in the air. The night was long, and the echoes were just the beginning. As dawn approached, the first loop would close, trapping them in a cycle of terror from which there was no escape. The Whispering Woods had claimed its new players, and the game was far from over. Chapter 2 The Unending Night. As the first light of dawn filtered through the dense canopy of trees, an eerie stillness hung over the clearing. The friends stirred in their tents, unaware that the night had silently reset itself, like a twisted record stuck on replay. Emma was the first to emerge, her eyes heavy with sleep. She stretched, taking in the familiar surroundings, but something felt amiss. The air was colder than she remembered, and a thin layer of fog blanketed the ground. "Morning already?" Jack yawned, stepping out of his tent. That was a fast night. They gathered around the now extinguished fire pit, the remnants of last night's flames cold and dead. As they prepared breakfast, a sense of unease began to settle in. "Does anyone else feel weird?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's probably just the morning chill," Alex replied, though his eyes darted nervously around the clearing. As they packed up to leave, a sense of déjà vu washed over them. The path they had taken into the forest seemed unfamiliar, twisting in ways they didn't remember. With each step, a growing sense of dread crept into their hearts. Hours passed, but the edge of the forest remained elusive, as if they were walking in circles. The realization dawned on them slowly: they were lost. "We should have hit the road by now," Emma said, her voice laced with panic. The forest around them seemed to close in, the trees like silent sentinels watching their every move. Whispers seemed to float on the breeze, unintelligible yet menacing. As night approached, a sense of desperation set in. They were no closer to finding their way out than they had been hours before. Reluctantly, they set up camp again, the unease from the morning now a palpable terror. The night brought no reprieve. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, soft footfalls, the rustling of leaves, and distant, haunting echoes. Sleep was a distant dream, as they huddled together, jumping at every sound. "It's like the forest is alive," Lily murmured, her eyes wide with fear. As the night wore on, their fears intensified. Shadows seemed to move just beyond the reach of their flashlights, and the air grew colder, an unnatural chill that seeped into their bones. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the strange occurrences ceased. The forest fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly. Exhausted and confused, they finally succumbed to sleep, their dreams troubled and filled with shadows. They awoke to the same scene, the clearing, the extinguished fire, the feeling of an unending night. The realization hit them like a physical blow: they were trapped in a loop, reliving the same night over and over. Panic set in as they tried to make sense of their situation. The Echo game, a simple legend, had become their reality, a nightmare from which there was no waking. As the second night approached, a deeper fear took root. What if they were never able to leave? What if the forest, with its whispering trees and shifting shadows, was their final resting place? The Echo game had just begun, and its rules were as unknown as they were unforgiving. The night awaited, and with it, the unknown horrors that lurked in the heart of the Whispering Woods. Chapter 3: Echoes of Despair. The cycle of the endless night had begun to wear on their spirits. With each repeat, the forest seemed to grow darker, the shadows longer, and the air thicker with a sense of impending doom. The reality of their situation was inescapable. They were trapped in a relentless loop, prisoners of the Whispering Woods. As the third night descended, a palpable tension hung in the air. The laughter and camaraderie that once bonded the friends were replaced by an oppressive silence, each lost in their own thoughts and fears. "This can't be happening," Alex muttered, his voice barely audible. "This has to be a nightmare." "We need to stay calm," Emma tried to sound confident, but her voice betrayed her fear. "There must be a way out of this." Their attempts to leave the clearing were futile. No matter which direction they took, they always ended up back at their campsite, as if the forest itself was toying with them. As they huddled around a new fire, trying to ward off the chill and the creeping dread, the forest around them seemed to come alive. Whispering voices floated on the breeze, too distant to discern but close enough to send shivers down their spines. Lily, her interest in the supernatural turning into a haunting curse, began to recite stories she had read about the forest. "They say the spirits of those lost in these woods linger, trapped in their final moments of despair." Her words did little to ease the growing panic. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, each wondering if they too were destined to become just another ghostly tale. That night, as they tried to sleep, the forest seemed to close in around them. The mist grew thicker, obscuring their vision, and the temperature dropped, an unnatural cold enveloping them. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, jolting them awake. They scrambled out of their tents, flashlights in hand, only to find nothing but the oppressive darkness and the dense fog. What was that? Jack's voice trembled, his usual bravado nowhere to be seen. It sounded like it came from the heart of the forest, Emma replied, her eyes scanning the darkness. Despite their fear, they knew they had to investigate. Perhaps it was a clue, a way to break the loop. Gathering their courage, they ventured deeper into the woods, the scream still echoing in their ears. The deeper they went, the more surreal the forest became. Trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches reaching out like gnarled hands. The ground beneath their feet felt alive, shifting and undulating with each step. The mist seemed to whisper secrets as they passed, voices of anguish and despair that chilled their souls. Shadows danced at the corner of their eyes, always just out of sight, but undeniably present. They reached a clearing they had never seen before, the trees forming a natural amphitheater. In the center, a lone tree stood, its bark gnarled and twisted, as if bearing the weight of untold sorrows. It was here the scream had led them, a chilling invitation from the heart of the whispering woods. As they stood in the clearing, a sense of dread washed over them. They were not alone. The echoes of the forest were closing in, and the night was far from over. The game had taken a sinister turn, and the rules were written by something ancient and malevolent. The friends realized, with growing horror, that they were not just players in this game, they were the pawns. Chapter 4: The Heart of Darkness. In the unnatural clearing, under the twisted tree, the friends stood frozen, their breaths shallow in the suffocating air. The atmosphere was thick with malice, and the silence was broken only by the occasional, distant echo of the scream that had led them here. The tree itself seemed to be a monument to despair, its bark etched with symbols that were neither man-made nor natural. The ground around it was barren, devoid of life, as if the earth itself recoiled from its touch. "This place, it's wrong," Lily whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. "It's like the center of all the pain in these woods." They circled the tree warily, the air growing colder with each step. As they moved, the shadows seemed to watch, shifting and turning, always just out of sight. Emma, trying to maintain a semblance of bravery, stepped closer to the tree. Maybe this is it, the key to breaking the loop. As she reached out to touch the bark, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, and the tree shuddered. A low, mournful groan emanated from its depths, a sound so filled with sorrow and pain that it seemed to resonate in their very bones. They recoiled in horror as the ground began to tremble. From the base of the tree, shadows began to seep out like ink in water, spreading across the clearing, reaching towards them with tendrils of darkness. Jack, overcome with fear, turned to run, but the shadows moved faster, engulfing him in their cold embrace. His screams echoed through the forest, a sound of pure terror that was abruptly cut off as the darkness consumed him. The others watched in horror, paralyzed by the sight. The forest around them seemed to come alive, whispering voices and ghostly figures moving just beyond the shadows, their faces twisted in agony. "We need to get out of here," Alex shouted, breaking the trance. They turned and ran, the darkness chasing them, always just a step behind. As they fled through the forest, the trees seemed to shift and change, the path twisting and turning, leading them deeper into the heart of the woods. The night was alive with horrors, each step revealing a new terror. The air was filled with the sounds of their own panicked breaths, the rustling of leaves, and the ever-present whispers of the forest. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking menace, every tree a silent observer to their plight. Finally, they stumbled back into their campsite, the familiar clearing now a sanctuary in the midst of hell. They collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, their minds reeling from the horrors they had witnessed. The loss of Jack weighed heavily on them, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were not just trapped in a loop, they were prey in a deadly game of cat and mouse. As the night wore on, the forest seemed to mock their despair. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of the damned, recounting tales of sorrow and pain. The shadows crept closer, encircling the campsite, a reminder that they were never truly alone. The echo game had shown its true nature, a nightmare from which there was no waking. The friends huddled together, knowing that the night was far from over and that the darkness was waiting, hungry for more. Chapter 5: Shadows and Whispers. In the aftermath of Jack's disappearance, a heavy silence had fallen over the camp. Emma, Lily, and Alex sat motionless, their eyes haunted by the terror they had witnessed. The darkness of the forest pressed in on them, suffocating and alive with unseen threats. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting weak, flickering shadows across their faces. Each creak of the woods, each rustle of leaves, sent shivers of fear down their spines. The night felt endless, a void where time and hope seemed to vanish. As they huddled together, a faint, mournful melody drifted through the trees. It was a lullaby, out of place in the oppressive darkness. The tune was hauntingly familiar to Emma, a song her mother used to sing. But here, in the depths of the whispering woods, it sounded twisted, a serenade of despair. "The forest is playing with us," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "It knows our fears, our memories. It's using them against us." Their thoughts were a chaotic whirl of fear and confusion. The game they had thought a simple legend had become a living nightmare, its rules as shifting and elusive as the shadows that danced around them. As the night deepened, the air grew colder, the chill seeping into their bones. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees whispering secrets in a language not meant for human ears. Emma tried to focus, to think of a way out. The tree, the clearing, there must be a connection, she mused aloud. Maybe if we can understand it, we can break the loop. But the task seemed insurmountable, the forest a labyrinth with no discernible path or logic. They were lost in a cycle of terror, each repetition eroding their hope and sanity. Suddenly, the forest erupted with activity. Shadows darted between the trees, faster than the eye could follow, circling their campsite like predators stalking their prey. The melody grew louder, a cacophony of discordant notes that drilled into their minds. Alex stood abruptly, his eyes wild with fear. "We can't stay here. It's not safe. We need to move, now." In a panic, they gathered their meager belongings and fled into the forest, the shadows at their heels. The trees seemed to bend and twist, creating a maze that disoriented and confused them. As they ran, the forest came alive with horrors. Faces appeared in the bark of the trees, contorted in silent screams. Hands reached out from the ground, grasping and clawing. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a tangible presence that suffocated them. They stumbled upon a small creek, its water black and still. Reflections danced on the surface, showing not their own faces, but those of loved ones, twisted in pain and sorrow. The sight stopped them in their tracks, a visceral reminder of the life they had left behind. The night stretched on, each moment a battle against the terror that enveloped them. The forest was relentless, a merciless entity that fed on their fear. As dawn approached, they found themselves back at their campsite, the cycle complete. The forest had toyed with them, a cat with its prey. Exhausted, terrified, and hopeless, they faced the reality that the echo game was far from over. The night would come again, and with it, new terrors from the heart of the Whispering Woods. Chapter 6: The Fracturing. The relentless cycle of night had begun to take its toll on Emma, Lily, and Alex. The once unbreakable bond of their friendship was showing cracks under the strain of unending terror. Sleep was elusive, filled with nightmares that bled into their waking hours, blurring the lines between reality and horror. As the next night descended, a sense of foreboding filled the air. The darkness seemed thicker, almost tangible, pressing down on them with the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting. The forest was no longer just an eerie backdrop, it had become a living, breathing entity, feeding off their fear. The trees whispered in a cacophony of voices, a chorus of the damned that spoke of pain and despair. Emma, once the leader, felt the weight of their predicament crushing her. Guilt gnawed at her for leading her friends into this nightmare. Her once clear and decisive mind was clouded with doubt and fear. Lily, the believer in legends and lore, clung to her books and notes, desperately searching for a clue, a way to break the cycle. But the words danced before her eyes, meaningless in the face of the forest's relentless assault on their sanity. Alex, who had sought acceptance and adventure, now found himself in a nightmare he couldn't escape. His once jovial demeanor had given way to paranoia and fear, jumping at shadows and murmuring to himself. As they sat in silence, a new sound pierced the night, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around them. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air grew icy cold. From the depths of the forest emerged figures, not human, but twisted, gnarled creatures of bark and vine. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and their movements were jerky, unnatural. The friends stood frozen in terror as the creatures encircled them, a nightmare brought to life. The creatures spoke in a language that was not spoken, their voices a chorus of screams and whispers that resonated in their minds. Emma tried to rally her friends, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to stay together. Don't let them divide us." But as the creatures closed in, their instinct for survival overtook them. In a moment of blind panic, they scattered, each running blindly into the dark embrace of the forest. Separated and alone, they stumbled through the darkness, the sounds of the pursuing creatures always close behind. The forest played tricks on their senses, paths leading nowhere, trees shifting and changing shape. Emma ran until her lungs burned, her mind filled with images of her friends, lost and alone. Guilt and fear overwhelmed her, the realization that she might never see them again. Lily, her mind a whirlwind of legends and tales, tried to find meaning in the madness. But the forest was relentless, its horrors unending, breaking down the walls of her rational mind. Alex, driven by sheer terror, ran without direction, his thoughts a jumble of fear and desperation. He could feel the breath of the creatures on his neck, their fingers grazing his skin. As the night wore on, the forest seemed to revel in their despair. The creatures toyed with them, herding them like cattle, driving them deeper into the heart of darkness. Exhausted, terrified, and alone, they each faced the horrors of the Whispering Woods. The echo game had fractured their friendship, leaving them to face their nightmares alone. The night was far from over, and the darkness was hungry. Chapter 7: The Descent into Madness. The forest's grip on Emma, Lily, and Alex tightened, each isolated and ensnared in their own personal hell. The creatures of bark and vine had vanished as abruptly as they appeared, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. Emma wandered aimlessly, her mind a battlefield of guilt and terror. The darkness seemed to press in on her from all sides, a suffocating cloak that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Visions of her friends, twisted and broken by the forest's malevolence, haunted her. She stumbled through the underbrush, her cries for her friends lost in the void. Lily's world had become a maze of twisted trees and deceiving paths. The knowledge she once clung to was now a source of torment, the forest mocking her attempts to understand its mysteries. Whispering voices followed her, recounting tales of sorrow and despair, each word a needle in her mind. She clutched her notebook to her chest, the pages filled with scribbles and incoherent thoughts, a testament to her unraveling sanity. Alex's descent into paranoia was complete. Shadows lurked in every corner, every rustle of leaves a predator waiting to pounce. He ran without purpose, his heart pounding in his chest, every breath a gasp of terror. The forest was alive, a malevolent entity that fed on his fear. His laughter had long since turned to sobs, the sound of a man pushed beyond the brink of despair. The night seemed endless, a cycle of terror with no respite. The forest played its cruel game, a puppeteer pulling at their strings, driving them further into madness. Emma's journey led her to a clearing she didn't recognize. In the center stood a gnarled tree, its branches reaching up like skeletal hands. Tied to the tree was a figure, its features obscured by the darkness. A surge of hope rose in Emma's chest, a survivor, someone who might know how to escape this nightmare. As she approached, the figure lifted its head, revealing a face twisted in eternal agony. It was a grotesque effigy, a warning or a sign, she couldn't tell. The sight of it shattered her last thread of composure, a scream tearing from her throat as she fled the clearing. Lily found herself at the edge of a dark pond, its waters still and black as obsidian. Reflections danced on its surface, showing her visions of her past, each one more twisted and horrifying than the last. The water called to her, a siren song promising answers and an end to her torment. With trembling hands, she reached towards the surface, her mind teetering on the edge of an abyss. Alex's flight led him to the heart of the forest, where the trees seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The ground beneath him opened, revealing a gaping maw of roots and earth. He stumbled, falling into the darkness, his screams echoing as he descended into the bowels of the forest. The night claimed them, their minds lost to the horrors of the whispering woods. The echo game had stripped them of their sanity, leaving only shells driven by fear and despair. The forest's whispers were a constant companion, a reminder that they were never alone in their nightmare. As dawn approached, the cycle would begin anew. But for Emma, Lily, and Alex, there was no escape from the darkness that had claimed their minds. The echo game was not just a game, it was a descent into madness. Chapter 8: The Endless Echo. As the first light of dawn struggled to penetrate the dense canopy of the whispering woods, it found no trace of the three friends. Emma, Lily, and Alex had been consumed by the forest, their minds fractured, their spirits broken. The clearing, once a site of camaraderie and laughter, now lay empty, the extinguished fire pit a grim reminder of the terror that had unfolded. The forest around it was silent, the night's horrors retreating into the shadows with the coming of the light. In the heart of the forest, where reality and nightmare merged, Emma wandered in a daze. Her once vibrant spirit was now a hollow shell, her eyes vacant and unseeing. The tree with the twisted effigy loomed in her mind, a symbol of her guilt and despair. She roamed aimlessly, a lost soul trapped in an unending loop of torment. Lily knelt by the dark pond, her reflection a distorted image of her former self. The whispers of the forest had infiltrated her mind, her once rational thoughts now a tangled web of madness. She reached out to the still water, her fingers tracing the surface, seeking answers in the abyss. But the pond offered no solace, only a mirror to her fractured psyche. Deep beneath the ground, in a labyrinth of roots and earth, Alex lay curled in a fetal position. The fall had not been physical, but rather a descent into the depths of his own terror. The darkness enveloped him, a suffocating embrace that fed on his fear. His laughter, once a beacon of joy, was now a distant memory, lost in the echoes of the forest. The whispering woods stood timeless, a sentinel to the cycles of despair that unfolded within its embrace. The game, a cruel jest, continued to lure the unwary, its rules written in the shadows and whispers of the night. As the dawn gave way to day, the forest returned to its slumber, the horrors of the night fading into legend. But the echo of the game lingered, a haunting melody that whispered of the lost and the damned. In the world beyond the forest, life continued. Families mourned, friends grieved, and the story of the three friends who ventured into the whispering woods became a cautionary tale, a whispered warning of the dangers that lurked in the heart of darkness. But the echo game was far from over. The forest waited, patient and eternal, for the next players to step into its shadows. For in the whispering woods, the echo never truly ends, it simply waits for the next soul to listen. And so, the cycle continued, an endless loop of despair and madness. The forest, a living entity, thrived on the fears and nightmares of those it ensnared. The echo game, a sinister force, beckoned the curious and the brave, a siren call into the abyss. In the whispering woods, the echo is eternal, and the game is never over. We hope you enjoyed the story of the echo game. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel.